Right now, we are at a situation where American crocodiles were endangered as recently as 15 or 16 years ago in 2007. They are now, guys, endangered.
We always think we are at the top of the food chain, but in the murky waters of South Florida, that title was stolen. A new king arrived and it cleared out the competition with brutal efficiency.
I think it's highly unlikely that so many people could mistakenly see the same thing for 15 minutes. It's possible it could have been a hoax, but less than a week later, there were 2 separate sightings in the same area.
Native crocodiles, animals that have survived since the dinosaurs, were suddenly being bullied out of their own home. The mystery of their disappearance sparked a massive manhunt involving biologists, trappers, and police. They expected to find a giant python or a rogue gator. What they found instead changed the safety rating of the entire state forever. The water is no longer safe for anyone. The day the rulers of the marsh vanished. The Florida Everglades is a world unlike any other. It is often called the River of Grass, but do not let that poetic name fool you. This is 5,000 years of biological warfare condensed into a slow-moving sheet of water. It is a place where everything is either trying to hunt you or trying to avoid being hunted. For human history, the hierarchy here has been crystal clear. If you are small, you hide. If you are big, you eat the small things. And if you are the biggest thing around, you do whatever you want. For eons, that top spot has been held by 2 ancient heavyweights, the American alligator and the American crocodile. Here is the thing about these two. They are like neighbors who have an unspoken agreement to stay on their side of the fence. The alligator is the brute force tank of the fresh water. They are black, armored, and generally bad-tempered. They rule the inland swamps, the lakes, and the canals. Then you have the American crocodile. They are the shy, sophisticated cousins. They are lighter in color, they have a narrow, pointy snout, and they live in the salty, brackish water down by the coast. The American crocodile is actually a threatened species. For decades, biologists have worked tirelessly to protect them. They are reclusive, skittish, and very hard to find. If an American crocodile sees a person, its first instinct is almost always to turn around and swim the other way. They want absolutely nothing to do with us. This behavior is key. It makes them predictable. Because of this balance, the Everglades was a known quantity. Rangers knew where the gators lived and they knew where the crocs nested. It was a system that worked. But starting around 2009, that system fell apart completely. It started with the old-timers. We are talking about airboat captains and fishermen who have spent 30 or 40 years on the water. These are guys who know the swamp better than they know their own living rooms. They know individual animals by name. They started noticing that the big American crocodiles were missing. These were dominant males and nesting females that had held prime territory for 10 years or more. You do not just walk away from a prime piece of real estate in the wild unless you are forced out. But here is the catch. They were not just moving, they were hiding. The behavior of the remaining crocodiles shifted overnight. Animals that used to bask openly on mud banks were now tucking themselves deep into the mangrove roots. They were acting like prey. That is a massive red flag in biology. When an apex predator starts acting skittish, it means there is a bigger, badder predator in the water. Then came the physical evidence. Rangers started finding carcasses. Now, alligators and crocodiles fight occasionally, but these incidents were different. The aggression was extreme. It looked like something had come in with a demolition crew. The injuries were not consistent with the usual turf wars. Whatever was doing this was strong enough to crush bone and tear through armored scales like they were wet paper. The confusion among the scientific community was palpable. You have to understand, there is nothing in North America that hunts adult crocodilians. Once an alligator or a crocodile hits about 6 feet long, they are off the menu for everything except humans. So, for fully grown adults to be vanishing or turning up dead, the math just did not add up. The weirdness ramped up when the nesting sites started going quiet. The American crocodile is a success story of conservation. Their numbers had been slowly ticking up. But suddenly, the nurseries were empty. The survival rate of hatchlings plummeted. It was as if a vacuum cleaner had been run through the ecosystem, sucking up the next generation of reptiles. Biologists were scratching their heads. Was it a disease? Was it a sudden shift in water quality? They tested the water and they tested the bodies. Everything came back normal. The water was fine, the animals were healthy right up until the moment they were taken down. This creates a terrifying atmosphere in the glades. You are out there in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by sawgrass that cuts your skin and water that hides everything, and you realize the monsters you know are afraid of something you cannot see. The silence was deafening. The usual splashing of big reptiles was gone. The mud banks were empty. It was not just the scientists who were worried. The locals were getting spooked too. People who lived on the edge of the canals reported weird noises at night. Big splashes, heavy breathing, shadows that seemed too big to be gators. The experts tried to rationalize it. They said maybe it was a bad year for food. Maybe the water levels were too low. But deep down, they knew those were just excuses. An apex predator does not vanish because the water is 6 inches lower. They vanish because they have been dethroned. The Everglades had become a crime scene, and the victim was the entire ecological order. The authorities needed a suspect, and in a place like Florida, where weird things happen every day, the list of suspects got very strange, very quickly. People stopped looking at biology books and started looking at conspiracy theories. The swamp has a way of making you believe in the impossible, especially when the lights go out. The theories people came up with were absolutely wild. Hunting for ghosts in the mangroves. When you have a mystery in the Florida Everglades, human imagination tends to run wild. And in this case, the theories were coming from every direction. The most popular theory, and the one that made the most logical sense at the time, was the Burmese python. The python situation in the Everglades is the stuff of nightmares. These are massive constrictors from Southeast Asia that have absolutely zero business being in North America. But they are here, and they are thriving. The python problem blew up, literally, a few years before the crocodile disappearances started. There is this famous photo that went viral around 2005. It showed a massive Burmese python that had tried to swallow a 6-foot American alligator. The snake had actually ruptured in the process. The tail of the gator was sticking out of the snake's midsection. It was a gruesome image, but it sent a clear message to the world. The pythons are not afraid of anything. So, when the American crocodiles started vanishing in 2009, the narrative wrote itself. Everyone from the news anchors to the park rangers assumed the pythons had just leveled up. The logic was sound. Pythons had already wiped out the raccoon, opossum, and bobcat populations in certain areas of the park by nearly 99%. They were running out of mammals to eat. It made total sense that they would switch to the reptile menu. Hunters and biologists went on the warpath looking for giant snakes. They spent thousands of hours patrolling the levees and the mangrove swamps. They were looking for a super snake, something 20 feet long that could take down a crocodile. And to be fair, they found plenty of snakes. They found pythons that were 16, 17 feet long. They found pythons with deer hooves in their stomachs, but they were not finding the smoking gun. But here is the catch. Snake attacks leave very specific evidence. A python hunts by constriction. It wraps around the prey and squeezes every time the victim exhales. It shuts off the blood flow. It is a clean end, relatively speaking. There is no tearing, no ripping, and usually no external marks until the swallowing starts. But the remains of the crocodiles and alligators they were finding were messy. We are talking about traumatic injuries. Limbs were torn off, skulls were crushed. There were bite marks that indicated a shearing force, not a squeezing force. A snake, no matter how big, cannot bite a chunk out of a crocodile. They swallow things whole. The dead animals in the swamp had been victims of extreme aggression that involved teeth and claws. So if it was not the snakes, what was it? This is where the theories got really wild. Locals started whispering about the skunk ape. If you are not from Florida, the skunk ape is basically the swamp version of Bigfoot. It is a cryptid that is supposed to be 7 feet tall, covered in hair, and smells like rotten eggs. Sightings of the skunk ape spike whenever something weird happens in the glades. People claim they saw a large, hairy figure throwing gators around like toys. While scientists laughed this off, the fear in the local communities was real. People were arming themselves, convinced a monster was walking the levees. Then there was the super gator theory. This one actually had some scientific plausibility. The idea was that agricultural runoff from the sugar farms, full of growth hormones and chemicals, had mutated a few alligators. People thought maybe we had accidentally created a 14-foot hyper-aggressive alligator that was cannibalizing the rest of the population. A 14-foot alligator is a dinosaur. It could easily take down a smaller crocodile. But alligators are strictly territorial. They stick to their fresh water. These attacks were happening in the brackish zones and the canals, places where gators usually do not venture. And get this, there was even a theory about a secret government release. Florida has a history of military testing. Some conspiracy theorists went online claiming that a bioweapon lab had suffered a breach during a hurricane, releasing a genetically modified predator designed for jungle warfare. It sounds crazy, but in a state where monkeys with herpes live in the wild because of a failed tour boat attraction, people are willing to believe anything. The most unnerving change, however, was not the rumors. It was the reports coming from fishermen. They were reporting lizards that were charging boats. One guide reported a crocodile that leaped out of the water to snap at a person on a dock. That is not normal behavior. American crocodiles are shy. They run away. That is their whole survival strategy. For a crocodile to jump at a human, it has to be either rabid or something else entirely. The pieces of the puzzle were all there, but they were jumbled. You had a creature that looked like a crocodile but acted like a shark. It was strong enough to eliminate other apex predators, and it was bold enough to challenge humans. It was hiding in plain sight because to the untrained eye, a big lizard looks like a big lizard. The experts were chasing shadows. They were setting traps for pythons and finding nothing. They were testing water for mutation chemicals and finding nothing. They were looking for Bigfoot and finding nothing. They were looking everywhere except right in front of their faces. The breakthrough did not come from a grand expedition or a military operation. It came from a routine patrol near Miami. It was a total fluke. A team from the University of Florida got a call about a nuisance croc in a canal. They went out to trap it, thinking it would be a standard relocation job. They had no idea they were about to catch the most dangerous animal on the continent. The animal in the trap looked wrong in all the bad ways. The genetic mismatch of the century. The capture team pulled the animal up onto the bank, and immediately the vibe changed. These guys handle hundreds of crocodilians a year. They know the drill. You tape the snout, you cover the eyes, and the animal usually calms down. They are professionals. They know how a crocodile feels, how it moves, how it reacts. But this one was fighting like a demon. It was thrashing with a speed and intensity that was way above the baseline for a native crocodile. It was not just resisting, it was trying to attack them. It was spinning, snapping, and lunging even with the ropes on. But it was the look of the thing that really threw them off. You know that feeling when you see a realistic robot and it looks almost human, but something is just slightly wrong, and it gives you the creeps? That is called the uncanny valley. That is exactly what these biologists were looking at. This animal was young, maybe 3 or 4 feet long, but it was built like a tank. The snout was broader and thicker than the slender, pointy snout of a Native American crocodile. The American croc has a long, narrow V-shaped snout, perfect for snatching fish. This thing had a wedge-shaped head that looked like it was designed to crush bones. The color was different too. Instead of the pale, grayish green that helps natives blend into the concrete and limestone of Florida's canals, this thing was a dark, bronzy olive with black spots. The lead researcher looked at the scales on the back. The pattern was geometric, almost too perfect. It did not look like the chaotic scutes of a Florida native. And then there was the attitude. Even with its mouth taped shut, it was hissing, a low, guttural hiss that vibrated in their chests. It was trying to tail whip everyone within a 5-foot radius. It had a nasty disposition that usually belongs to an angry alligator, not a shy crocodile. They loaded it onto the truck and took it back to the facility. The whispers started immediately. Could it be a hybrid? Hybridization is rare in the wild, but it happens. If an alligator and a crocodile somehow managed to breed, it might create a sterile, angry mutant. Or maybe it was a genetic deformity, a throwback to some ancient ancestor. They took tissue samples, a little clip from the tail scales, and sent them off to the genetics lab. DNA analysis is not like in the crime shows on TV where you get a result in 5 minutes with flashing lights. It takes time. Weeks. While they waited, they kept the animal in observation, and what they saw was terrifying. The growth rate was off the charts. This mystery crocodile was putting on mass nearly 28% faster than a native species. It was eating everything they threw at it. Rats, fish, chicken, it did not care. It was a biological machine designed to consume calories and convert them into muscle. In the wild, a growth advantage like that is a superpower. It means you get bigger than your competition faster, you reach breeding age sooner, and you become a predator earlier. Then the email from the lab arrived. The subject line might as well have been a siren. The DNA did not match the American crocodile. It did not match the American alligator. It did not match the spectacled caiman. It did not match any species native to the Western Hemisphere. The genetic sequence was a 100% match for Crocodilus niloticus. The Nile crocodile. The room went silent. You have to understand the gravity of this. This was the worst-case scenario. We are not talking about a nuisance animal here. We are not talking about an iguana eating your hibiscus plants. We are talking about the second largest reptile on the planet. This is the animal that National Geographic films when they want to show nature's pure fury. This is the beast that waits at the river crossings in Africa to tear apart wildebeests and zebras. Finding a Nile crocodile in Florida is like finding a great white shark in your swimming pool. It does not belong there, and it changes the safety rules instantly. The scientists realized that the strange look, the aggression, the fast growth, it all made sense. They were looking at an African monster that had somehow crossed the Atlantic Ocean. But the DNA told them something else too. They caught 2 more of these strange crocs in the following weeks. When they compared the genetics of the 3 captured animals, they were identical. They were siblings. This was the detail that turned the situation from a curiosity into a crisis. If they were siblings, it meant they were not just random escapees. It meant there was a breeding pair out there somewhere. Or worse, a whole clutch of eggs had hatched years ago, and these were the survivors. The invasion was not starting. It was already here. The Nile crocodile had established a beachhead in the United States. They had been living in the swamps for years, hiding in plain sight, successfully camouflaging among the Native American crocodiles due to their similar appearance. And when the biologists pulled up the stats on what this species is capable of, the blood drained from their faces. The American crocodile is a fish eater. The Nile crocodile is a man-eater. The difference is life and death. The stats on these predators are absolutely nightmare fuel. Florida's new apex predator is hungry. To understand why the biologists were sweating, you have to look at the rap sheet of the Nile crocodile. This is not just another lizard. It is widely considered the most dangerous predator to humans in Africa. It is a creature that evolution spent millions of years perfecting for one purpose: ambush and destruction. Let's look at the numbers. The Native American crocodile, the one that belongs in Florida, is timid. In the entire history of the United States, there has never been a confirmed fatality caused by an American crocodile. Not one. They eat fish, crabs, and maybe a raccoon if they get lucky. If you splash water at them, they usually leave. They are specialized for catching slippery prey, not crushing large mammals. Now, look at the Nile crocodile. In their native range in sub-Saharan Africa, they are responsible for an estimated 200 human fatalities every single year. Some sources say it is even higher because many attacks in remote villages go unreported. They view humans as just another soft, slow mammal that comes to the water's edge. They hunt us. They track us. They learn our patterns. They get massive. A male Nile crocodile can grow to 18 feet long and weigh over 2,000 pounds. That is the weight of a small car. Their bite force is arguably the strongest on Earth, clocking in at around 5,000 pounds per square inch. To give you some context, a lion bites with about 600 pounds of force. A Nile croc bites 8 times harder than a lion. If they grab you, you are not prying those jaws open. You are done. But here's the catch, and this is the part that really scared the Florida officials. It is not just about size, it is about attitude. Nile crocodiles are aggressive pack hunters. They work together to dismantle large prey. They have a temperament that is extremely volatile. They are smarter than alligators and they are meaner. There is a famous Nile crocodile in Burundi named Gustav. He is a legend. He is rumored to have claimed over 300 lives. He is said to be 20 feet long and has bullet scars on his hide. Gustav is a reminder of what this species can become if left unchecked. Imagine a Gustav living in a canal in Miami. Imagine him waiting near a golf course pond where kids look for lost balls. That is the reality Florida was facing. And there is another factor that makes them perfect for an invasion. They are tough. The Native American crocodile is sensitive to the cold. If Florida gets a cold snap and the temperature drops, the native crocs get sluggish and can even die. This keeps them trapped in the very southern tip of the state. They cannot move north. They are biologically fenced in by the weather. The Nile crocodile is different. They are more adaptable. They can tolerate cooler temperatures much better than their American cousins. This means they are not restricted to the southern swamps. They could technically migrate up the coast. They could move into the residential canals of Fort Lauderdale, the golf course ponds in Boca Raton, maybe even as far north as Orlando. Imagine a predator that eats people, grows faster than the natives, and can live in your backyard pond even in the winter. That is what was sitting in the containment tank at the university. The implications were catastrophic. If these things established a breeding population, the Native American crocodile was doomed. The Nile crocs would out-eat them, outbreed them, and likely just eradicate them directly. It would be a total genetic takeover. But the bigger threat was to the people. Florida is a water state. People kayak, they swim, they fish, they walk their dogs by the canals. The entire lifestyle is built around water. If the water becomes the home of a designated man-eater, the lifestyle collapses. You cannot have tourists paddling through the mangroves if there is a high probability of an 18-foot African monster launching an attack. The authorities realized they were sitting on a powder keg. They had identified the enemy and they knew what it was capable of. But the question remained, how on earth did they get here? Crocodiles are good swimmers, but they cannot swim across the Atlantic Ocean. They cannot survive the open ocean journey from the Nile Delta to Miami Beach. The investigation turned away from the swamp and towards the dark alleys of the human world. The answer lay in the greed and stupidity of the black market. It turns out the most dangerous invasive species in Florida is not the python or the crocodile. It is the guy who wants a cool pet to show off to his friends. The guilty party was walking on two legs. The invasion. We invited in. It always comes back to humans, every single time. The Nile crocodiles did not book a plane ticket and they did not swim from Egypt. They were brought here. Florida has a massive problem with the exotic pet trade. It is like the Wild West down there. People want to own the weirdest, deadliest things they can find. Here is the likely scenario. Someone, maybe a collector or a shady dealer, imported a batch of Nile crocodile hatchlings. When they are babies, they look cute. They are 10 inches long, they chirp, and they fit in a 10-gallon aquarium. They look exotic. People buy them because they want to feel powerful. They want to say, I have a man-eater in my living room. But then they grow, and Nile crocs grow fast. Within a year, that cute lizard is 3 feet long and trying to bite your fingers off. Within 3 years, it is 6 feet long and looking at your dog like a snack. It starts smashing the glass of the tank. It starts hissing every time you walk by. Eventually, the owner realized they had a literal monster in their house. They could not feed it enough. It costs a fortune to feed a growing crocodile. They could not clean the cage safely, and they knew it was illegal to have it without a special high-security permit. So instead of calling the authorities and facing a fine or jail time, they did the cowardly thing. They drove out to a canal or the edge of the swamp, opened the crate, and dumped the problem into the wild. They probably thought, oh, it's just one animal, what's the harm? It will probably die. But they were wrong. They likely dumped a few siblings together, male and female. They gave the invasive species a starter pack. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission launched a massive hunt. They call them the Croc Docs. They went out night after night shining lights into the water looking for that specific eye shine. They managed to capture the ones they knew about. They pulled those 3 siblings out of the wild. They scanned the DNA of every crocodile they could get their hands on. They declared the invasion contained. But here is the scary reality of biology. You can never be 100% sure. The Everglades is huge. It is 1.5 million acres of impenetrable sawgrass and mangrove tunnels. You could hide an army in there, you could hide a jumbo jet in there and never find it. All it takes is 2 crocodiles, one male, one female, that manage to avoid the traps. If they find each other, the clock starts ticking again. This event revealed a gaping hole in our defenses. We have strict laws about importing fruit because we are afraid of bugs, but for years it was surprisingly easy to buy a deadly predator online. The legacy of this event has changed how biologists look at the swamp. They know the door is open. The Native American crocodile was already struggling because we destroyed their habitat to build high-rise condos and diverted their water to sugar farms. We weakened the king and then we dropped an assassin in his bedroom. This discovery forced a conversation about designated danger zones. If the Nile croc ever truly takes hold, we will have to change how we live. Signs that say, "Do not feed the alligators," will have to change to "Danger, man-eaters in water." Swimming in fresh water could become a thing of the past. It would destroy the tourism industry. Who wants to go jet skiing if there is a chance of being eaten alive? The disappearance of the Florida crocodiles was solved, but the unease remains. The natives have slowly started to return to some areas now that the invaders were removed, but they are wary. The swamp is quiet again, but it is a different kind of silence. It is the silence of a system that knows how fragile it really is. We dodged a bullet this time. We caught the invaders before they could take over completely. But as long as there is a market for dangerous pets, and as long as there are people reckless enough to release them, the next invasion is just a car ride away. The Nile crocodile proved that the monsters are real, and they are waiting for us to make a mistake. There is a final theory that keeps experts awake at night. What if we didn't catch them all? What if the ones we caught were just the clumsy ones, the ones that got caught because they were not careful? What if the smart ones are still out there, deep in the glades, growing bigger, breeding, and waiting for the right moment to surface? So the question is, would you still go kayaking in the Everglades knowing a man-eater might have slipped through the cracks? Or is it time to close the swamp for good? Smash that like button if you learned something terrifying and subscribe for more mysteries from the deep.